This tutorial is about the adaptations of Pride and Prejudice and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Adaptation concerns the process of transposition from one medium to another, often from a written text, such as a novel, to a visual medium, such as a movie or TV series. This process is very similar to a translation process, where there is an original and a translation. I use the word original with quotation marks, since there is no such thing as a true original. Everything always comes from something else. But in an adaptation process, we can talk about originals, since they are original in relation to the adaptations at least. It's important to remember that an adaptation is an interpretation of the original. Therefore, to some people who are watching an adaptation, the story is known, which could result in a clash between that person's own interpretation and the movie maker's interpretation. In cases where the story is altered, there's often tension and annoyance. This critique of interpretational choices can also be found in translation theory, where the translator's work is questioned. To some people who might not have read the original, the movie or TV series becomes a kind of original. And if that person reads the novel, if it's based on a novel, afterwards, it's often the novel that is contrasted to the movie instead of the other way around. In theories about adaptation, the methodology for studying the process of transmediation is used. Sometimes the method is analyzed or criticized, and there might be an element of evaluation there. And sometimes the relationship between original and adaptation is analyzed. Some features, such as the narrative, the story, can easily be transferred from one medium to another, but other features might be more difficult to transfer. Most people who watch films based on novels and have read those novels express a need to compare the two literary productions, and they comment on the result of the transposition process. This happens everywhere, both in informal groups between friends or more formal contexts, such as in academic critical articles. The interest in adaptation is widespread. Filmmakers have been using literary sources, in particular novels, both highbrow and lowbrow, since film was developed as a narrative medium. To use written and already published fictional work is a widely recognized practice. One example to illustrate this is the Academy Awards. It's difficult to measure a film's popularity or its status, but in this example, I've chosen to use the Academy Awards, or the Oscars, as it's sometimes referred to, as a way to illustrate my point. There's a category called Best Original Screenplay that's been around since the first award ceremony, but it was previously called Best Original Story. Alongside this category, the category called Best Adapted Screenplay has also been recognized since the first time in 1928. Movie adaptation is an issue that has attracted critical attention for as long as there have been movies. In academia, it's also a widespread approach. Nowadays, the practice is spread beyond the process from novel to film to include other transmedial processes. Writers of all kinds, such as rewriters and critics, from fan magazine to scholarly work, focus on film adaptation, both the process and the result of that process. This is not a course in theories of adaptation, so I will not discuss these theories, but since we're working with adaptations, I thought it appropriate to acknowledge these fictional works as adaptations and tell you a little bit about what that means. There are plenty of websites discussing these theories in general, and also those that have more specific discussions about the adaptations we are using in this course. Feel free to check out these websites if you're interested in adaptations and theories of adaptation. So now to the actual adaptations that we're watching. Pride and Prejudice from 1995, the BBC TV series, directed by Simon Langton. Together with Ang Lee's movie Sense and Sensibility, that was produced in 1995, starring Emma Thompson, Kate Winslet, and Hugh Grant, the BBC version of Pride and Prejudice, a TV series of 6 episodes, also produced in 1995, reached a great audience and contributed to a Renaissance period for Jane Austen's literary work and life. In this version, Austen's novel is adapted by Andrew Davies, and the series is produced by Sue Birtwistle and is directed by Simon Langton. The series was nominated for and won several awards, and the actors and actresses, in particular Colin Firth, who plays Mr. Darcy, gained a huge reputation. The story is close to the novel, but differs in many places, and one scene in particular has been widely debated, and is also widely debated in Bridget Jones' Diary, that you will read further on in this course. And that's the scene where Mr. Darcy dives into the pond, a scene that is not mentioned in the novel. The focus from Elizabeth and the other female characters shifted to include Mr. Darcy and the male characters to a greater extent in this adaptation. However, the actual dialogue of the novel is left rather intact. This 1995 adaptation is not the first. There's been numerous other TV and movie adaptations before this one. And there's been an earlier TV series called First Impressions, which of course is the title of Austen's first work. Pride and Prejudice has also been made into a movie in 2005, directed by Joe Wright. And the biggest difference between a TV series with 6 episodes and a feature film of about 2 hours is, of course, the inability to capture the complexity of the novel in such a short time. Many situations must be deleted in such an adaptation, and in order to manage a task like that, there's a need to delete several situations and characters, as well as compress the plot. And since the 1995 version was such a success, it was a tough act to follow. But the 2005 adaptation has received positive reviews and several nominations and awards. And in addition to being compared to the original Austen's novel, Wright's movie is also compared to Langton's series to a great extent. And our task in this course is not to judge the adaptations, nor to compare them to each other, but rather to read them or see them as separate interpretations of Austen's novel. They function as a basis for the popularized versions, since the 1995 TV series inspired Helen Fielding to write Bridget Jones' Diary. Alice in Wonderland is a movie directed by Tim Burton that came out in 2010. And Tim Burton's adaptation is both an adaptation of the 2 Alice novels and could be seen as a popularization piece, if you consider that the first and the last part of the movie, the events that take place before and after the Wonderland, has an added layer of power structures that many popularized pieces have. In this adaptation, Burton combines events from the 2 books and alters them somewhat as well. There are no rules for how much you can alter the story or not in an adaptation, but it's very much an adaptation of a story. And remember that an adaptation is always an interpretation.